Hello, I'm Hugh Coakley from the Guildford Dragon News. Guildford Borough Council announced this week that George Potter, Liberal Democrat councillor for Burpham and Surrey County councillor for Guildford East, is to be the new lead at Guildford for climate change after the resignation of Kate Taylor, who held the role for probably a little bit less than a year. We invited George to be interviewed by the Dragon to tell us about his new role, and we are delighted to have him here now. Welcome, George, and congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you very much, Hugh. I'm very pleased to be here.
You're now a borough councillor. That's a job. You're a county councillor, and with your new role on climate change, you have the extra workload as an executive member on Guildford Borough Council, and you also have a full-time job. How do you cope?
Well, I should say that I'm very much not the first councillor to be a double hatter in terms of being on for county and for borough. I'm definitely, nor am I the first or indeed only current executive member to be having to hold down a full-time job at the same time. Some of them also have to worry about child caring responsibilities and family and all the rest of it on top of that. So whilst it is definitely a balancing act in terms of making sure I stay on top of everything, I wouldn't have accepted this position if I wasn't confident in my ability to do the job and to do the job well. I'm also very lucky in that I have there's a very good team of very skilled people at the council working on climate change and who are doing the lion's share of work. My job is first and foremost to provide policy direction and to be an advocate for this within the council and to the public. It's not my job to go around, I am not the one who goes around writing all the reports, doing all the research. I should also say that I've been on the climate change board ever since the start of the year. So I've already got a very good working relationship with the team, with the other members of the climate change board. I've already been following the progress and actions on climate change thus far. So it's about as seamless a transition as one could possibly wish for. And I'll also say that for me personally, this is very much sort of my dream job in that I think the climate emergency is the single most important challenge facing our planet. It's affecting, facing our borough, facing our country, facing every single one of us. It is going to be the defining crisis of the next 20, 30 years, and it's already well underway. The most important thing we can do for now and for our own futures is to act. I believe very passionately in the importance of this issue, and I just feel incredibly privileged to be in a position where I can play my own small part in dealing with this issue for the borough.
I recall when you were elected in 2019, one of the earliest actions of the Lib Dem administration, with you as a proposer, was for Guildford Borough Council to declare a climate emergency. There was great fanfare that evening when the motion passed. You were passionate about the need for change then, and it sounds like you're still passionate about it. But what has Guildford Borough Council done regarding the climate emergency?
We've done an awful lot, which I will outline, but I think I should begin by acknowledging that there is still an awful lot to do. And I do think, with benefit of hindsight, that we ideally could and possibly should have done more. But I think all of us were completely blindsided by the pandemic, which obviously caused a huge amount of disruption to what the council was doing and really put the span in the works of a huge amount of projects, not least because people who were skilled and have relevant expertise were being pulled elsewhere to deal with the very immediate problems of, looking after people who were shielding and all the rest of it and responding to the pandemic. And that has been a real blow compared to what I had hoped would happen when the motion was passed in 2019. However, as I said, we have done an awful lot. One of the things I think has been which will be the most significant, is the fact that we have embedded climate change throughout our planning policies. We passed a set of supplementary planning documents during lockdown, as it happens, which set incredibly ambitious standards, the best we basically possibly can within the law for all new developments in terms of ensuring we have significant net improvements in biodiversity in new developments, that all new homes have to come with electric vehicle charging points, they have to show carbon reductions above and below the national minimum standards. And that is going to be hugely beneficial, I think, and hugely impactful over the next few years. But that's just the planning side of things. We're also doing things like making sure that, for instance, that when we go ahead with the council housing development on Guildford Park Road car park, that we're going to make sure that every flat built in that development is going to be built to be achieving net zero by 2030. I know that the housing department is already spending tens of millions of pounds refurbishing council houses, and as part of that, they're also looking at making sure that that the council housing stock that the borough has is going to be, again, net zero by 2030, which is both addressing the climate change issue, but is also, of course, helping to cut energy bills for tenants during a cost of living crisis. We're doing things like looking at Planet. We've got plans underway to electrify our fleet of vehicles, particularly our refuse fleet. We're doing things like we've already installed solar panels on some of our big buildings. We're currently exploring ways that we could potentially use our surface car parks to harvest solar power by putting sort of solar canopies on top of that. Again, it's early days, but those kind of things we're looking at, where we have a rolling program of replacing our street lights and upgrading them to LED, so they're more energy efficient. We've set up a sustainable business network. We're working with the University of Surrey to make use of that expertise on sustainability. We're collaborating very closely with Waverley Council and their climate officers as well, so we can achieve something which is more than the sum of our parts. And above all, we've embedded climate change into the fabric of our decision-making at the council. So just in the same way that every single report the council has for a long time had to have an equalities impact assessment section in it, we've now made sure that every single report has a climate change impact assessment as part of it. So in every decision we make, we are looking at it through the lens of what does this mean for climate change? What does this mean for how we tackle the climate crisis?
So, George, that sounds very positive, but I'm not sure other people agree with that positive assessment of what Guildford Borough Council are doing. In February this year, excuse me, Guildford was rated poorly by the Climate Emergency UK, a not-for-profit cooperative which tries to share best practice between councils. We lagged behind both Waverley and Woking. We scored 1 out of 9 for community engagement and 1 out of 5 for measuring and setting emission targets, which you would have thought was absolutely a basic requirement. And also in July this year, the Dragon ran an article about, I think the headline was, is climate action stalling in GBC? And a councillor, Catherine Young, told the Dragon about her frustration, and she was asking for climate change progress to be reported at each council meeting. I mean, how do you respond to those less than rosy views of GBC's actions?
Well, I'll start with the last point. In terms of reporting, we don't report on climate change at every full council meeting. The reason for that is because there is often an awful lot of business to go through at council meetings, and council meetings are first and foremost for decision making, which needs to be done by the whole council. Reports purely for information purposes, there's not really time to do them justice. That's why we have set up a climate change board, which Councillor Young is a member of, along with myself. The climate change board meets every 2 months, both to hear progress reports, but also to scrutinise and advise upon the next steps and the next actions we're taking. Back in 2019, I pushed very hard and succeeded in making sure that the minutes of those climate change board meetings are reported not just to all councillors, but they're also published on our website. So any member of the public can go into the website, go to the climate change board and see the minutes of its meetings and see what we've been discussing, where we've got to. In terms of a wider question about the progress we've made, it absolutely has not stalled. Right from 2019 onwards, we have been setting carbon targets internally, and we have been we set ourselves the ambition that we're going to be net zero as a council by 2030. We're going to be carbon neutral overall net as a council by 2030. That is the goal. As always, there's a risk we might not meet that goal, but by making that our goal and by doing everything we can to meet it, if we miss it, we'll be missing it by 1-2 years at worst. Whereas if we set ourselves a goal of 2035 or 2040, but the more ambitious we set our goals, the better our likelihood of achieving progress. What we have, I think, struggled with, and what we have not done as good a job as we should have done, is communicating that strategy. Now, for instance, back in 2019, Guildford was ranked incredibly highly by Greenpeace in terms of its climate change action plan. And the difference, though, is that the way that councils are ranked now on our climate change plans has changed dramatically over the last 3 years, which is a good thing. Because what is required now is much more in the way of publicising detailed information, publicising a detailed action plan. That is what Waverley has done. They have got a very detailed, thorough action plan, which has been published on their website. And that is partly why they rank so highly. Our problem is that we've been planning and undertaking many of the actions you'd need in such an action plan, but we have not published a full action plan. And that is, I am very happy to say, something which Kate, my predecessor, was focusing on with a laser-like focus over the past year, particularly with our new climate change officer, Nat Prodger, which instead is another problem is that with this area is that climate change specialists are in very high demand. Recruiting specialist staff to local government where the pay is significantly lower and retaining them has always been a challenge. And that has certainly slowed us down more than we would have liked. But we're getting ready to take to the executive for formal adoption in the new year a climate change action plan, which is modelled on Waverley's in terms of covering all the things that Waverley covers, but also I think I can say with some confidence is going to be a step up from Waverley's, because we're not just saying let's copy what they've done. We're saying let's see what they've done and let's see how we can go above and beyond that and how we can improve that. How can we be more ambitious? How can we be more detailed? What things can we cover and pick up which were perhaps not covered in their plan? So whilst I recognise that the communication has not always been as good as I would like, whilst the publication of the plan has not been as good as I would have liked, we have been working very hard over the past year to make sure that we remedy that. I'm pretty confident that next year we'll get a much higher score when it comes to the ranking of our climate change plan. But more importantly, the actions that we are taking internally, the actions we are looking to take, have been going on throughout. They've not slowed down, they've not stopped, they've not been abandoned, they've just not been as visible. And I hope that when people see the climate change action plan when it's published, they'll be quite impressed by the depth and the breadth of it.
Okay. In July, Kate Taylor told us that that you were 60%, as there was a 60% reduction in the carbon emissions since 2008, which is a very positive thing. But she also said she summarised the actions since 2019 as fitted solar panels on 2 car parks, installed 20 electric vehicle charging points, improved biodiversity through extensive tree planting and land management, held a car-free day in 2021, which will be repeated, which it was, and improved collecting utilities data for better reporting. I mean, to me, that sounds like run-of-the-mill stuff, the sort of stuff we should be doing routinely as good stewards of our assets. It hardly seems to be leadership. I mean, do you agree? What do you think about is being done by the council on climate change? I mean, are we doing enough?
Well, I'll start with the point of view of saying this is a crisis. I don't use that word lightly. It is a crisis. It is a potentially existential crisis for the human race. So no matter how much you are doing, you could absolutely be doing more. We could absolutely be doing more. Businesses, communities, individuals everybody could be doing more. There is no such thing as too much. So I'll prefix everything I say with that, we absolutely could be doing more. We're trying to do more. We will continue to try to do more. But at any single point along the way, I am sure there will always be things which somebody else will be able to point out and say, why aren't you doing that? And when people do that, I'm very keen that we should listen to that and say, oh, yes, that's a good idea. We should try to do that. But in terms of, I would say that over the past year, yes, some of those things which Kate talked about are run-of-the-mill, things which councils should be doing anyway. Most councils are not and have not been doing them. We have stepped up to do them because, again, but that's not all we've been doing. As I've mentioned, Guildford Borough Council owns hundreds of council houses. Now, it would be very easy for us as a council to turn around and say, well, yes, they're owned by us, but they're not part of our operations, so we don't have to worry about them. Let's just focus on our own operations, make ourselves net zero, maybe buy some carbon credits or something, or fund a few tree planting schemes, so we look net zero on paper. That would have been the easy thing to do. That is not what we have been doing. We have been saying, there may not have been much visible to show for it because it takes a long time to develop these plans and to crucially to finance these plans. But as I mentioned, the housing team are going to be spending tens of millions of pounds refurbishing our council housing stock, making sure that new council housing stock is net zero compliant by 2030, making sure that existing stock is brought up to net zero standards. And that's just one department. The same goes across the board. And unfortunately, by definition, the problem, as always, with this stuff is that whilst it's quite easy, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and we've gone after the low-hanging fruit. What is difficult is what we are now trying to do. The more harder to reach fruit, the stuff which is going to take time and money, and the time is the crucial thing. A lot of these things have taken time, and particularly with the disruption of a pandemic, but that is absolutely what we have been doing and what we are continuing to do. And but what I will say as well is that I fully recognise that one area where we could be doing better, and where I'm very keen that we should do better, is leadership. Because when it comes to leadership within the borough as a whole, because Guildford Borough Council, we only account for 1% of emissions within the borough. And the only way we're going to affect meaningful change is by taking on a leadership role, by working with businesses, with public institutions, with communities, with other bodies. That is what I'm very keen to do. That is a key part of our action plan of what we're developing at the moment. But that is the next challenge for us.
It sounds great, George. It sounds, it sounds very positive. In 2019, we were told the same thing. The then Climate Change and Innovations Board said that they would have a plan within 12 months. I know COVID has got in the way, but here we are 3 years later, and we still don't have a borough plan, as far as I'm aware. There is a draft climate change plan, which I believe you're working on. It does lead me.
David, you've muted yourself.
Oh, okay, sorry. So can you hear me?
You just did it again.
Hugh. Not David, Hugh.
Sorry, Hugh. Sorry,
No,
Hugh.
that's okay. That's okay. So it is. I do wonder about the commitment by Guildford Borough Council. In 2019, the Climate Change and Innovations Board said it would have a plan within 12 months. A lot's happened since then, including COVID. But 3 years later, we still don't have a borough plan for climate change. It's in draft, but it's still in draft. How high is in the priority list for the council is climate change?
I'm sorry, Hugh, but I have to correct you there. We do have a plan within 12 months, and that plan was an internal plan for what we were going to do as a council for our own operations. And obviously that's evolved since then, but that plan was produced within 12 months. The bit which has been missing has been the whole borough-wide engagement, and that's what, and crucially, the much more granular detail. So the draft climate change action plan is not the plan we talked about in 2019. It's a second round of much more detailed planning, and which is just as much externally focused as it is internally focused.
Okay, then, right? You can hear me?
Yeah.
I got it on. So, we've talked about what has been done. We've talked about some of the problems. If you were going to sum up, George, your plans for climate actions going forward in the next 12 months, just to give our readers, our listeners, heads up on what you would want to see happening in the next 12 months. Can you summarize that?
Yes, certainly. But also in relation to your last question, I realize I've got to answer part of it. In terms of how high a priority is it? It is very high priority. We obviously, as you might be aware, we've got a new structure at Guildford Borough Council with a reorganised structure as part of the joint management team, which we're sharing with Waverley. The overall executive who is in charge of climate change is Ian Doyle, and I know that he and everybody in his team gets the importance of this. Ian, in fact, previously helped develop a climate change action plan for a previous council. So this is very much a case of it is a priority, and also in our corporate plan, in our corporate priorities for a borough, climate change is one of the 3 key issues we are focusing on. So this is a top priority. In terms of what I see happening over the next few months, what I'd like to see happening, to summarize for you, the adoption of a climate action plan, which is going to cover the decarbonisation of all of the council's activities, and also outlining how we're going to take a leadership role to work with partners and stakeholders across the borough in society to support and encourage climate action and affect the areas which aren't directly under our control. And I will note at that point, that's not something which it should necessarily be Guildford's responsibility to take care of. The county council, for instance, has far more leverage over things like transport and so on than we do, but in the absence of leadership from any other body, we can and will be stepping up to provide the leadership which has hitherto been lacking. We are also going to be, and crucially, I think I'm quite keen in particular on embedding both structural changes, things which will make lasting differences in terms of sustainable transport, in terms of air quality, in terms of renewable energy generation. But I'm also very keen at making sure that we go beyond a few eye-catching things in the town centre. I'm very keen that what we're doing needs to extend to places like the villages within our borough, working with our parish councils, to the ash built-up area in particular, which is often, unfortunately, regarded as an overthought by some people and afterthought by some people when it comes to things the borough is doing. I want to make sure this reaches the whole borough and every community, and crucially, but what we're doing here is first and foremost not a diet of hair shirts and hardship, but actually pursuing an equitable transition that isn't going to leave anybody behind, something which creates opportunities and creates better ways of living, more jobs, more prosperity, a better future for our entire borough and every community in it, as well as being about tackling a huge crisis facing all of us.
George, we'd very much like to touch base with you again in the next few months to hear how you're doing, in particular about your draft climate change plan, which hopefully will be adopted. And that's thank you very much for talking to the Guildford Dragon News. We look forward to good luck in your new role, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve.